And we ended up doing this pretty radical thing of pricing initially at a loss at $1 per resolution. When we shipped Fin initially, it cost us like $1.50 or something like that per resolution, or $2 per resolution at one point. I owned the input, which was around like, cost is going to fall. I'm pretty sure we could engineer a cheaper system, and also that resolution rate was going to rise. About 85% is handled completely by Fin. We are not at all an outlier. It's like we have loads of customers with like higher automation. Also, we have a very hard domain.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Chief AI Officer. Today, I'm really excited to bring you Fergal Reid, who is the Chief AI Officer at Intercom. If you don't know Intercom's story, it's kind of a remarkable story of AI transformation in SaaS, almost a case study in disrupting yourself. Often put out as the first company to offer outcome-based pricing in AI, like really leaning in with their AI agent Fin. Fergal kind of grew through the ranks throughout this whole process at Intercom, and so I feel like he has an incredible perspective to share on this. Fergal, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before we get started into all the things that are going on at Intercom and the industry and AI in general, like, just what has been your experience at Intercom in terms of the rise, ChatGPT setting the world on fire, you having worked in this space for a while and everything else, like, just how does it feel to be in the industry right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very interesting. It's very exciting. It's demanding. It's stressful. There's a lot going on. Strategic assumptions constantly have to be revisited. It's very difficult to know how the industry plays out over time. So it's exciting. I mean, I was always interested in AI. I was always a big believer in the ability of AI to radically change the world and change what people do. And so it's pretty exciting to get to work in the industry when it really starts to work and really starts to deliver value at scale, and general intelligence really starts to work and be meaningful. So it's very exciting, but it's hard. It's hard work to.
Yeah. And I mean, you were obviously working in ML before the ChatGPT moment. You were even doing that at Intercom. It comes out, and I think, Fin comes out 6 weeks later almost. So, like, very, very quickly off the back of that. Yeah, what was that launch moment like? It was not an obvious bet at that time. What were some of those decisions on the inside to lean into this so quickly?
Yeah, so we had a pretty small AI team, maybe 6, 7 people, which I ran. Um, and we had built a previous product called Resolution Bot, which, you know, is similar in some ways to the vector search part of a modern RAG system. We had neural networks in production back from maybe 3, 4 years before ChatGPT came out. And we're doing like intense detection and all that. And, so we were putting, I guess, medium-sized language models in production. We had early access. We had like very early beta access to GPT-3, I think it was. So we had a relationship with OpenAI way back before ChatGPT. But like a lot of people, we were still kind of caught off guard by ChatGPT when it came out, how good it suddenly got. We had I'd wrote like an internal memo about 6 months before ChatGPT came out, talking about like the Google Lambda paper and how, because it was the first time I think we saw published results of like, wow, these large transformer-based models are starting to dialogue very naturally. And I wrote a memo and I was like, this is going to disrupt our space. We don't know when, but it's coming. But even despite all of that, we were still caught off guard a little bit by ChatGPT. We didn't use the like Text Da Vinci 3 or whatever the models were. We didn't use them in the few months before ChatGPT. We were just caught by surprise by ChatGPT. But I think to our credit, we reacted fast. As soon as we saw it like literally that evening. I think I had access to the API. We still had API access as near the OpenAI customer, and we were using Text DaVinci 3 in the API. And I was like, wow, this is a big deal. This is here. This is the thing we've been waiting for. It's going to change our space. And there was a lot of internal uncertainty about whether this was like a toy or whether this was real. And so I led a small prototype effort just with the little AI group to very quickly ship some features built on the Text DaVinci 3 model. And so it was the end of November 2022 that ChatGPT came out. And before the holidays, Christmas holidays that year, we had built maybe 5 or 6 features in our inbox that used those models to do things like help people summarize their inbox or help people rewrite content. And like I kind of picked those features somewhat arbitrarily, somewhat based on intuition. But we had previously tried build a summarization feature and it just hadn't worked. We'd been using like transformer models and they just weren't good enough. And then suddenly it was. And like I think like every other company in customer service shipped versions of those features sort of the 6 months following that. And so that was pretty cool. And we kind of we shipped those quite quickly. And then we did a launch by the end of January with like customer testimonials for customers that have been using those features for like, 2, 3 weeks and were willing to give us testimonials that the summarization was working. And so it was really happy with that. And then around that time, end of January 2023, OpenAI gave us early alpha access to GPT-4, what later became GPT-4. And that was a pretty interesting moment because we had access to GPT-4 like before the rest of the world. And it was just this huge step change up. And specifically was really good at instruction following. I think we had access to an early build of Claude actually at around the same time. Um, and really the thing for us was that I had always been like prototyping these products and like, can we get it to answer customer service questions just with information that's provided to it, not using its own internal knowledge? That for us was the game changer. And I guess we now call that RAG. We didn't know it was called RAG at the time. I think so. We shipped. I kind of just messing around on my laptop and stuff, put together the first build of something that I guess looks like a modern RAG thing using pre-release GPT-4. End of January 2023, and was like, wow, this looks good. Started working with one other engineer on my team, really strong engineer, Mario, and started to prototype out what would eventually become Finn. And built a team around that. I led the team in a really fast cross-functional way. Built kind of internal momentum that this was like not a toy, this was a real thing. And shipped, I guess, a very early beta version of Finn, but good enough to work, good enough to consume a help center and then answer questions just with the help center content, and ship that using GPT-4 on GPT-4 launch day in March 2023. That was just a sort of a beta or a prototype where someone could come along and use it online. And then we went generally available with that. We had beta customers who went generally available with that in June that year after doing like a whole bunch of build and a much bigger team. So yeah, it was really true prototyping. There's a lot of internal skepticism around AI, and it was really true that sort of prototyping that we really managed to convince ourselves that this is not just a toy. This is actually really valuable. It can do that business job end to end. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who was working in like messaging uh, at the ChatGPT moment as well, and that was also building like intent-based systems, right? That are so limited in just the complexity of managing all those intents for every customer and like for the customer themselves. It was very clear how big of a shift this was. Um, I'd love to understand that moment though of, okay, you're prototyping internally, like you see the value, the team around you sees how impactful it can be. You're testing it with a few customers. Like, how does the entire company then just like get behind this and make that leap? Because I think that's one of the things that has made Intercom special is like really, really leaning into Finn, and kind of like putting the entire brand behind Finn and like leading this kind of outcome-based pricing. What were some of the internal discussions around that, and how did you make that decision, and how did you kind of show everyone that it was really worth the bet? because it's a
Yeah,
big
I mean,
bet at the time, right?
yeah, and I think there was always an openness to this. Like
Mm,
the company was not on a super successful trajectory at the point ChatGPT came out, which made us open to do higher variance things.
mhm.
It was like post COVID and the COVID like sugar rush of like everyone is a SaaS genius, everyone's revenue is going up. Then like things are turning, and it's like, oh wait, we're not. And so I definitely think there was an openness to experiment with things. But like that said, there was still a lot of skepticism about AI and how disruptive it would be for our core business for quite a while. And so even after we had shipped Fin, we knew at that point we had a real product. It was answering a whole bunch of our own customer service questions. And we had a whole bunch of successful customers. We were starting to see like really transformational success for them and for their business, where maybe it was doing like 20 or 30% of their entire customer support volume. Like a pretty big deal. But even then, there was a lot of internal debate about to what extent, this was something we should bet very heavily on. It was quite quick to get alignment to make like a moderate bet on Fing. The launch team was maybe like 20 people or something like that. And then after that, like it was pretty easy to get, I don't know, 50 people. I could be completely wrong, but there's something like that, 50 people cross-functionally working on it. But like, you get in innovator's dilemma, the total volume of our revenue that it was very small. And there was a lot of debate internally about the speed with which customers would adopt it. Like after we had shipped it and generally available in June of that year. The revenue curve was looking good, but very, very, very early. And I was kind of like really championing it, but like there was a lot of question marks internally about whether we would need to build a bridge to the future of when our customers were going to be willing to adopt this. And so we built a Copilot product, and partly because we were like, okay, people are in the inbox, they want to adopt it. It's going to be a while before they're willing to like adopt Fin, even though it's a great product and they really should. And maybe we should build a Copilot product. And part of my team, my expanding team was starting to lead the AI part of Copilot. And literally when Copilot was about halfway through, I was like, oh, we should cancel Copilot, right? It's like we should put everything on Fin. We had a big strategic debate internally. There was like a company strategy, and I wrote this like alternate strategy, which are called all in on Fin. And, there was all this debate internally, like consolidation, like customers, everyone always wants consolidation eventually. Like our features like Fin, tin parts of an overall help desk product, or are they like ultimately your agentic platform and that like, it's going to do lots of different use cases. And so there's a lot of debate of that internally, but we had a big strategic discussions and ended up deciding to bet essentially all in on Fin. We essentially decided to bet very, very strongly on Fin. But probably, it's a process. There's a learning process. There was exec conviction early that like we're going to try this, we're going to like test it, but then there always has to be a process of doing the homework, checking the customer retention. Is this actually delivering value for people? Wow, yes, it is. Okay, what are the strategic implications of this? How much we should bet on it? Gosh, this revenue curve is starting to look good. This is starting to transform people's businesses. Okay, what are the strategic implications of that? Let's go. So there's a process. There's always a process. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there was that halfway decision and then you went all in, because I think that would be the criticism for anyone that was coming into the space trying to disrupt you as one of the more incumbent companies, right? Of, an
Yeah.
AI, an agent native platform rather than something that's just had AI strapped on top of an old ticketing system, right? Is like can do very different things. And so, yeah, that was a big bet to make, but obviously probably the right one in the future. I think one thing that I've heard you say, um, and that everyone is always thinking about, right, is like how much will the foundation models end up eating our lunch, or like how do we differentiate in a world where everyone has access to the same underlying foundation model? And you've said in a few places, I think that like intelligence is not necessarily the bottleneck. That like you haven't like you've only ever really shipped a few percentage points at most when a new model ships. Like a lot of it is the underlying infrastructure and engineering around it. Can you talk to that a little bit? Because I think many people worry about if we're wrapping models, how do we maintain our moat? And I think you have a unique perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's a very nuanced discussion because it depends at the point in time you're looking at. Like two
Yeah.
years ago, everyone was like, "Oh, you're just a tin wrapper. You're tinly wrapping the models," and we, we don't really think of ourselves as playing an incumbent hand in this space. I would say our investment into the hardcore technology of this space has been deeper and broader than any new entrant at like every point along the curve. I think our
Mm.
technology is really, really good. Um, and so we don't really think of ourselves as playing an incumbent hand. And so even when we were having the internal debate about like how much of our 400-person R&D team we put on this, and it's only like 50 people, like that still compares really favorably to any new entrant at that point. Um, and it was pretty radical for us to make the big investment we did. But yeah, in terms of the kind of the tin wrapper piece, we were kind of hitting this a lot like 2 years ago, and it was total misunderstanding. It was just like people not understanding how much work you had to do around the model in order to deliver a product that was valuable and worthwhile. And then like over time, there was just a ton of depth to invest in to make, even nowadays people call it like they started referring to it as the harness around the
Hmm.
model. Like even that's like a bad mental model, right? Like it's not just a harness around the model. For us, for a very long time, it was really the case that like you have engineered this AI system and it uses the models in certain bits and pieces of it to deliver certain constrained functionality. And so it's like, you know, it's just a different way of thinking about it. Now, over time, it changes, right? Over time, like the models do become more and more important. I think that's inevitable. The models like will move more and more into the model. And so, you know, products that used to require a big complex engineering architecture, but just the models used in certain points, a model can do more and more of that. And so there do become applications where, it is like there's a harness around the model, and over time the model will become dominant. And I think, you really got to think about your product architecture and make sure you're not in an area that's going to be eaten by models. And the size of area that's going to be eaten by models increases over time. And so then, like, so does the size of business problem that you can address economically increase over time. And so, you got to be thoughtful about those things. You want to make sure that, like, you're continuing to add a big, thick layer of value between the model and the set of business problems that you're addressing. And also over time, uh, I think companies like us start to become the best strategy starts to become to like vertically integrate, and you start to realize that the model that's like, the most horizontal model in the world is probably not the best model in the world for your specific application. As your application gets bigger, that becomes more and more true. And then it becomes optimal strategy to go and to say, well, I don't want this model that knows ancient Greek. I don't need it to have all those tokens and all those parameters dedicated to ancient Greek or dedicated to, like when you look at a model like Sonnet and like it scores really well in humanities lattice exam, and you're like, do I want that in my customer support use case? And so yeah, I think over time you start to realize that like no, you can vertically integrate and you can build models that are perfect for this specific application, and you end up with this like vertically integrated stack. I think that's the future for a lot of companies. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even just personally in my own use, it's very clear that highly constrained use cases, even now with the more powerful models, are always yielding better results. And I think that's true of everyone that's been on this show, has always talked about the extent to which constraining the model is where you get some of the best outcomes. It's also kind of this tension with what you just talked about, which is the startups that are often building on the frontier of what the model capability is today are the ones who can do the best when the next model gets released because they already know where that limit is and they've suddenly explored those use cases in a lot more detail than their competitors. But I do think like this idea of vertical stack integration is important. And you mentioned harness being the wrong mental model, and you presented like a few ideas there, but like, what is, do you have a mental model as simple as the harness idea that you think is the right one for our listeners?
Um, I'm probably not really. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd say a model is a building block. It's a component of an overall system.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, it depends on the application, and there's a greater set of applications in the world now where you can put the model in a tin harness and it does a good job. I do think as the models get more capable, the size of that set does grow, and so but then the world scales up and it scales out, and things like costs and efficiency and quality start to become more important. And yeah, and so I think you end up, there's a lot of drive to customize along different axes then, like for there to for it to be not the case that customization works, a lot of things have to be true. The general, like, the bitter lesson is only true under like very certain conditions. And so yeah, I think we're seeing that more and more. I think a future where, you know, the best path to best performance isn't just with increasing generality. Instead, there's going to be a degree of specialization. That feels inevitable to me. Yeah.
And in that world, like in terms of the degree of specialization being where you differentiate or where you get the most value, like where does building an AI product break down like the fastest? Is it in like the model layer? Is it in the product itself? Is it in the org that you're building around shipping it? Or like what has been your experience so far?
I mean, I think all these things are hard because it's new and the whole technology stack is immature. Like, the org that you have is probably not well suited to shipping AI product. I think that's true of all companies. I think even if you're a frontier lab, you're still learning how to ship AI product. I think that's true if you're a SaaS company, you probably have some portion that's now good at shipping AI product and some other portion that's still on that journey and still learning there. So I think it's true. I think everything is hard at all levels. If you want to do reinforcement learning to train your own model, you need to deal with all this like data issues and governance, and then you have to deal with like, actual doing the work and all the infrastructure, and all the tooling is immature everywhere. So it's all hard because it's new technology and because we are pushing to the edge of what's easy in order to deliver a whole lot of value really fast. And so I think it's an exciting time and an exciting part of technology to get to work on as a result. But yeah, it means it's hard, yeah. But like, I don't know, building websites in the late 90s when Amazon was rising was also hard. That, had stuff, but they got edge. Yeah. So
Yeah. I mean, I guess we can go. The next part of the questions is really around like one, how you measure the outcome and that the model is working in a probabilistic system, right? I think evals have become a huge thing in this space for a while now. You're working in an industry where that's highly sensitive because you're working directly with people's customers, obviously. You've also made a big bet with Finn in terms of outcome-based pricing and like a flat, I think it's, I don't know if it's still 99 cent, kind of like per
yeah.
resolution pricing. I have to imagine that under the hood, there's like radically different costs across customers to get to that resolution each time. Like, can you talk me through a bit some of those decisions? Like, how did you come to that price point? How much did you have to share in terms of what the underlying architecture was doing and like the costs internally? Because it's a big decision to go with that kind of flat based pricing.
Yeah, it's definitely a decision to go with the flat-based pricing, and Dara, our CTO, drove a lot of that. Um, there was there's a lot of different factors in outcome-based pricing. We really liked that it aligned the interests of our sales team and our success folks with the interests of R&D and the interests of the customer, in terms of like the outcome-based pricing really makes you want to get the customer set up successfully and getting real value. And that was huge. That's not to be underestimated. Um, Probably the bigger factors when we did it initially was that it was just so expensive to serve. I think when we shipped Finn initially, it cost us like $1.50 or something like that per resolution, or $2 per resolution at one point. And we were running like GPT-4 and like dedicated capacity, and we are doing all this like modeling about like the utilization and the throughput of the hardware because that was the only way to get capacity at the time. And so it was against all that backdrop of being very early and it being extremely expensive. And we wanted a price that the market would tolerate, and we were willing to gamble that, based on analysis, that like costs would come down over time, or we could get the costs down over time. And even Finn at the start, when we launched it first, was using GPT 3.5 Turbo or one of those cheaper models to do the less critical parts, and then using GPT-4 for like the RAG part. So it was already this blended price, and then that blend was different per customer, and then different customers saw different outcomes, different customers had different size of RAG. So there was a lot of modeling that had to be done, and really cutting up and down through like the cost basis and willingness to pay and all these things. And I think initially, actually, in the kind of the beta, we were pricing at $2 per resolution, which even then wasn't very profitable for us. And that was just causing a lot of friction. And we ended up doing this pretty radical thing of pricing initially at a loss at $1 per resolution, or I think it was actually a loss, or it's only a year loss, but I think a loss. And I was like, yeah, we'll be able to get the cost down over time and eventually make a profit. And so, yeah, it was definitely a hard decision and weighed a lot. And Dara eventually made the call on it, and I was pretty excited about it, but it definitely felt risky and hard. And the world, we were the first, certainly in our space, and maybe one of the first in general to do AI outcome-based pricing at any scale. And there was a lot of explaining to customers like, how do I budget for this? And so there's a lot of affordances that have to be done around like ways of getting like plans and caps and forgiving overages and all those things. But now I think the market likes it. And you know, I recently led pricing for a new product that we're about to launch pretty soon, which probably be launched by the time the podcast comes out, which also is outcome based pricing. I had to make a bunch of these decisions, and actually nowadays it's what's palatable to customers. Like in the 3 years since we launched Fin originally, it's almost become the expectation now, and especially if you want to charge a lot. And we have a new product that has a $10 outcome attached to it, and it's definitely valuable. It definitely gives the value. It's a much more rare outcome. And actually, when we did their pricing survey of all the different ways you could price it, that's the palatable way, because it's got to be expensive because it's doing a lot of LLM work in order to kind of give that outcome. And if you bind it to the outcome, then the customer can understand and rationalize it. Where if you do it on the basis of per conversation, each conversation just starts to look like really expensive and it becomes unpalatable to the customer. And in theory, a customer should be economically rational. You should be able to walk them through your cost basis and all that. It just doesn't fly. you know? Yeah, it's something people are willing to pay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy in hindsight to see the logic there, obviously, and the fact that it's so directly tied to customer value is amazing. And to your point, it aligns everyone from the tech team to sales to CS to like all focus on delivering that value. But it was still a big bet at the time that compute would fall, like inference costs would fall so drastically. Like, and I think we've seen that play out, which is a great bet. And you've gained market share. So like all of those things have
Yeah.
were good bets. But it's still,
I
yeah,
mean, I guess I owned the input, which was around like, cost is going to fall, and we're
yeah,
pretty sure we can engineer cheaper systems, and also that resolution rate was going to rise.
yeah.
We'd be able to engineer a system that had rising resolution rate over time, both of which affect our unit economics. I owned those things, and they definitely felt like risks, but I was very confident in them at the time. And I think Dara owned the overall decision. And the decision felt bold. I was excited by it because of the alignment it would create with the customer across our organization. But I remember it felt bold. I was like, wow, okay, we're actually going to do this. That's exciting. And Dara's like, yep. And so it was cool.
Like you mentioned as well, it's like scary. It has become so much more of a norm now, but it
Yeah.
is also scary to CFOs who can't price out what something is going to cost ahead of time. And you, like you said, you can build that business case. You can put in the caps, you can do all of those things, but it's still, even on the customer side, who's the first one diving into that, probably feels a bit scary as well. So it's, I would imagine, as you said, you worked very closely with your customers to figure that out, and to put something in front of them that felt palatable.
I,
Um,
and this still comes up. We've gotten used to it, but it still comes up. I remember in the early days of Finn, we were doing all this engineering around it and like really increasing the resolution rate a lot. And there was some customers that, their relationship manager had gone and done all this work and helped them model out things. And now the product was delivering them a lot more valuable, which is a good problem to have. But they're like, I have to go back to my finance team and explain this. And this still happens. Literally, this came up with like the Apex launch. So we launched our own model, Apex to power Fin. And we'd one enterprise customer who, it gave an extra 5 percentage point of an increase. And so, you know, w- which is great news, but like the RM in the channel was like, oh gosh, I better reach out to them and tell them about this new model change that's going to increase their spend, but in a
yeah.
way that's good for business. And they were really happy and everything. But it's a muscle that we now have, but that we absolutely have to build. Yeah, and it's a real muscle that you have to build. That, guess what? There's some amazing change the customer should be delighted to see coming, but it's going to increase the revenue and the cost for them, and we need to talk to them about that. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on it and you spoke about it earlier. Like you launched Apex, you built your own model for this. You've talked about vertical integration across this. That was also probably a big bet in a world where, everyone assumes the foundation model like input is going to be the most important thing, but you're talking about constraining it. Like, how did you navigate that decision and ultimately like make the bet?
I think that the first piece of data is, um before Apex, we used to run Fin in production on Claude Sonnet 4.0 for informational queries, and not Sonnet 4.5, not 4.6, not even Opus 4.5. We tested Opus 4.5, and none of them outperformed Sonnet 4.0 for our RAG customer service task, which is really interesting. That's a really interesting data point. So, everyone assumes that the frontier models will just continue to get more and more generally intelligent. They continue to get better at everything. I'm like, I don't think that's the right mental model. I think there will be some tasks that you can saturate in terms of intelligence, and extra general intelligence doesn't really move the needle for those tasks. And we had started to see evidence of that, and that like judgment and expertise and trade-off matters more. And like, again, I've a thought experiment I use for this. That this is not shocking. Like, if you had like two choices to, let's say it's a retail assistant in a clothing store, right? You have two choices. You've got like, you can hire a Nobel Prize winning physicist with like really high IQ, or you can hire the retail assistant with like 20 years of like expertise in it. Like, which do you want to hire? Like, it's not obvious that you go for the physicist. Physicist maybe is smarter or something in some general sense, perhaps. But like, that doesn't mean you choose them, because you're like, no, I have enough intelligence for this task. What matters more is like, I don't know, the emotional intelligence or the sales experience or the personality or and the expertise. And like, we know that's true in the real world, right? There's loads of jobs that look like that. And so why do we assume that for models there'll be this bitter lesson effect, that the model will always get more generally intelligent and then be better at everything? And that's just not what we're seeing. And
Hmm.
then, that's half the equation. And I think the other half of the equation is that the open weight models started to get really, really good. They started to get to the point where they're like, 3 months behind the closed models on like most things you care about. And, when you put those two things together, you're like, huh, you can go and you can take an open weight model that's a really compelling model and do a whole ton of reinforcement learning work and teach it the exact right trade-offs that you need for your vertical domain, and probably like reshape its expertise distribution a little bit too. Like, I don't think we're just teaching trade-offs. We're also like, we think we're kind of reshaping expertise a little bit as well. You can do that. You can end up with a model that's like dramatically more efficient and better performing. And we thought we'd end up with a model that was dramatically more efficient. We thought we'd run maybe some subset of our queries on it, the easiest subset of our queries with a router model. And actually, as our reinforcement learning project went on, we had subsequent build after build of the model. And, probably about 3 months before we launched Apex, I was like talking to the exec team. I was like, hey, like, this is going to work. And this feels like it's not just going to be cheaper. This feels like it's going to be better by the time we're done here. And we're working initially on like smaller models, and then we scaled the post training up. And so yeah, it worked really well. And I think that's a playbook that we're going to take to other places we use models. And I think you're going to see the whole application layer ecosystem execute a playbook like this. I think that for many application areas, the intelligence will saturate them. In fact, I think there's an underappreciated point in the narrative. When you talk about like, you get like AGI pill, you talk about like massive returns and like, you're scaling curves and you become scale pilled. It's like, yeah, if that's the case, if the models keep getting smarter, they will very rapidly saturate most application areas in terms of intelligence. And then, like, what are the frontier AI companies going to do? The frontier AI companies are going to need to find constant sources of new tasks that benefit from, like, you know, PhD or whatever, like Nobel laureate, super Nobel laureate level intelligence, and probably they will, right? Probably there'll be whole new parts of the economy. I just think there's kind of an irony, which is like, oh, your job is getting outcompeted by AI, but you find a new job when you go up the stack. I think that's going to happen to the models too. They're going to get outcompeted by AI, and they're going to have to find new jobs to go up the stack. Otherwise, everyone's just going to be running open models that have been fine tuned for specific applications for 99% of token generation. So
Yeah.
it's going to be, you know.
I mean, I love that model of thinking and what you are saying in terms of, you know, even just constraining the domain or like the harness or not the harness, just the engineering around it. I think it's also even with the products the foundation model companies are coming out, right? Like everyone right now is obsessed with Claude Code, for example, but like even these coding products where the innovation is less in the actual underlying intelligence that's feeding into it and more in terms of like the orchestration of that intelligence and the tooling around it that's providing so much value. I think that is gonna be happening in a lot of domains, and it's also, I mean, inevitably, it's also about the data, right? And so, like, there's a ton of domains where, like, businesses are sitting on data that is gonna make that use case far more useful, than just, like, the underlying general intelligence. So it's yeah, there's a lot that's shifting, but I think those are some good core principles for people that wanna build in this space. What to you is driving the most adoption of agents right now, right? I think there's so much hype. Everyone is very excited. I think customer service is like the quintessential use case for a kind of agent automation. What has been your experience over the last few years of like the drivers of this and maybe the points of resistance?
I mean, customer service is actually a really hard space to get adoption in. Like, to my mind, we should have seen much more radical adoption of agents in customer service than we actually have.
Hmm.
I think slow space for adoption of agents, given how good they are. Like, Finn, I don't know exactly. We're at something like 85% automation rate just internally in Intercom. So of our customer support volume, but 85% is handled completely by Finn. We are not at all an outlier. There's like, we have loads of customers with like higher automation percentages than us. We have a very hard domain. And so like, you can, it's really transformative. It's real. It works. And it's not been adopted all that much given that, right? In that, like,
Hmm.
a lot of customer service volume in the world is still being handled by humans. And to my mind, it's actually surprising how slow the adoption of Fin and its competitive set has been. And I think it's because you're dealing with like cost centers, and I think they tend to be slow to adopt new technology in general. And so I think by contrast, adoption of agents, where it's exploding at the moment and where I think you'll see it continue to explode is, of course, coding, right?
Hmm.
And that's more about product-led growth. You mentioned Cloud Code. I'm a huge fan of Claude Code. I was an early user. I think I was the first user of Claude Code in Intercom, and I sort of went and forced everybody else to use it. And I talked to the Claude Code team last March, like 13 months ago. I was like, this is huge. This is an amazing product. I think Claude Code is an amazing product. I do think that most of the value in Claude Code is probably in the model there. Personally, I think that
Okay.
actually, yeah, I don't. I think Claude Code is actually is more of a harness. They built a bunch of functionality into it. I don't want to play it down, but I think they think that, and I think that that's probably true. Um, yeah. So I think Cloud Code and Cloud Code's architecture is much more naked to the model than a lot of other products that are out there.
Mm.
Um, and maybe it's like the future. Obviously, they've built a ton of functionality into it over time too. So it's probably both at this point.
I mean, I
But
would definitely take your read on it more than mine. You have far more experience in the coding space than I do. But I've also been like a daily user of Claude Code for about a year, and as a non-technical person, it is like groundbreaking for me to be able to interact with the model in that way. And I use it. I don't use like the desktop version at all anymore, even if I'm doing like random marketing tasks. Like I find Claude Code to just be so much more reliable and effective in terms of how
right,
you can build a system.
that
But
and
your
that
adoption
work.
thing is also interesting because a lot of the people I speak to on this show, there is, I think, for people who work in tech and like technologists generally, we always, you know, we think the technology, like there's this rational case for the adoption of the technology, and then there is this human element, like the last mile adoption of the technology, that always goes much, much slower than we expect. And I think that's like, you know, what drives that for you? And, let's make this last question because I know we're running up on time, but like given the transformative potential of this technology, what is the resistance that you're seeing? And like what do you think is the underlying driver of that? Maybe at the organization level, but also at the human level.
And just to say, I mean, when we talked earlier about like us having to build evidence for the bet on Finn, like the people internally in Intercom on the other side of the argument were very much saying that, and they're like, "Hey, it's easy to talk about the good technology, but we know adoption is slow," and that's true, and like they were right about that. So it's a very legit thing to balance and weigh,
Mm,
and you never know how fast it's going to be. Um, I do think that like if a product is like a killer app and if the value like you can forget that that is intermediated or influenced by the value that's being delivered. And I think you're starting to see that with coding agents. The value is so compelling that it trumps all other considerations. um I think that like in customer service, people get it now. Like the market now understands and is in this fast adoption curve. I think you're seeing that in our revenue curve and the revenue curve of other competitive companies. And so I think like, you know, eh, diffusion of innovations, like it takes time. People need to see it. They need social proof. And, you get this kind of like diffusion of innovation curve that's classic. And I think we're seeing that play out. And it's playing out pretty fast for AI compared to other products. And there's all the frictions like, kind of, should I believe this? Is this true? Obviously in customer service, people have been pitching incredible visions around AI powered service for 10 years. And so, it's really, really working. Like, we literally will talk to other companies who have major products in this space, and I will tell them the thing about how 85% of our volume is fully automated, and like they won't believe it. They'd be like, yeah, yeah, that's great, that's great. But like in the back of their head, they'd be like, it's probably 30%. It's probably some dodge or something like that
yeah,
in
yeah.
there. And they won't believe it. And yeah, so internally, even we have to like keep looking at the distribution of automation rate of our customers and showing that internally so that people believe it internally. And so it's just hard. Like adopting to shifts in reality is hard. Like structure scientific revolutions, paradigm shifts and stuff. Like um I don't know, when someone cracks relativity or quantum physics or something like that, people don't believe it. People don't believe the atomic bomb until there's a test or something. It's like it's just it's really like it's hard because most new stuff people are talking about is overhyped, right? Like we'd all this hype about like crypto a few years ago, and like it was mostly didn't impact the world that much, right? It did not deliver the hype. And so I think AI is underhyped still. But I can understand totally why people pattern match it to other things like crypto. And it's understandable that just skepticism, yeah.
Yeah, I think AI is a really funny one because I think there are areas where there's so much hype and there's so much over estimating or over hyping of the capability versus the reality. And yet it's still always kind of underpinned by this like deep lack of awareness of like how truly transformative it is to like our underlying like how we work as an economy. And like when you do obviously work with the models every day, you know that it's a very jagged frontier of intelligence depending on the
Yeah.
domain, depending on the problem, whatever it might be. um and yet it's yeah, it's really hard to fully wrap your head around it. I mean, do you think that we are in any way prepared for like what is actually coming as a society as far as the
No,
technology
I don't think
shift?
you're fair at all. And
Yeah.
I totally agree that it's jagged today and people can overestimate it. But like people pattern match it. Like just so many experts in AI and like huge names in the field. And like they will write an article and they'll get it published in a top tier place. And I'm like, did you ask the model? Did you actually test that with them with a recent model before you wrote that article? And because what the article is saying is clearly out of date. And so no, I think that it's jagged today and it's overhyped in lots of spaces today, but the models are continuing to get smarter and like they are saturating a whole lot of industrial tasks, but the new tasks that will open up, the possibility of like some form of recursive self-improvement, I take that very seriously.
Mhm.
And I think that people are not engaging with like there has to be some asymptoting like really really soon that I just don't see, or on absent that, then people are not at all engaging with the reality of where we're going, right? We're going somewhere absolutely wild. And I think basically nobody is engaging with it. And I have a lot of sympathy for Anthropic, how Anthropic write about this stuff publicly, and people like Dario write about this stuff publicly. He's surprised and shocked by the extent to which people are not engaging with it. And I don't think he's talking his book. I mean, clearly he has a book to talk, but I don't think he's talking his book. I think Anthropic seems to me to be a mostly pretty sincere company, and I think they're just trying to like get everyone to kind of get to grips with how wild this is. And so you don't know. Nobody knows until it happens. Scaling laws can peter off, and actual task performance and last mile and bottlenecks and adoption can all be like really big things. But I do think in terms of capability, we're on an absolutely wild curve, and we're going to start to get into really, really wild regimes. And I think there'll be place in the world for application layer companies where we're the customer agent company or the customer support company. We have the models optimized for that. But also what's going to happen at the frontier, I think, is going to be probably on pretty wild trajectory. So yeah, I don't think we're prepared at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. You don't even have to buy into like whether you believe like large language models is going to be the architecture that gets us to any kind of super intelligence. You don't even have to buy into that to understand that what is the capabilities today will cause such profound shifts once they're actually fully distributed in the economy and society that we don't even have to get to that place for it to be like a very, very transformative shift. And
Yeah.
obviously, when we do get there, like, yeah, you're right. It's going to be a very, very wild ride a as a lover of sci-fi my entire life, who has always read about what human relationship with AI, like what that tension is, how you navigate it, I think the next 10 years are going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I think they are, and I have yet to see a convincing argument that large language models won't get us there. I mean, they might not like large language models with reasoning or thinking, and they are so capable today. And you've all these arguments which I've never bought, like Jan LeCun, who's obviously a much bigger name than anyone I know, but like talk about like this thing like, oh, they're autoregressive, so errors will accumulate and stuff. It's just not true, Like you can see like a reasoning model crank through like a hard man's frontier maths problem. And like, yeah, maybe errors will accumulate, but at a higher level, at some sort of meta level in its thinking trace, it can like correct itself and try different things. And no, you don't know, but I have yet to see a compelling argument that they won't breeze right past human intelligence. And I think they're up there. I think they're jagged, but I think they are really up there at the moment. I don't know, like at least 90th dial of human IQ or something, and in a jagged way, but they're up
Uh-huh.
there. Like I I interview people for a living. I get used to working through hard technical problems with people, and like a hard technical problem that's in an LLM's training set, if you're running like, I don't know, a frontier model, but like high thinking effort and stuff, it's pretty good. It doesn't make that many mistakes, and it's jagged and you have to be careful how you use it. But like humans are jagged too. And like, a lot of humans are very jagged in different ways. And so, yeah, it's,
Yeah.
I don't buy the architecture thing. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to end. I could talk about that question alone for another hour, Fergal, but I'm also wildly underqualified to really speak to it, so I won't. But I have loved this conversation. It's just thank you so much for taking the time. If our listeners want to follow your work and what you do, where should they go?
I guess Twitter. I look back. I tweeted about Cloud Code, or X, I think we're calling it now, a year ago or something. I was like, it's going to change software development. I had a cause to look at that tweet recently. I was like, yeah, I stand by that. I think that's pretty on the money.
Age well.
That phrase well. Doesn't always, but
Yeah.
as well. Cool.
Well, that was, Fergal Reid, Chief AI Officer at Intercom. Go check him out on Twitter, now X. Fergal, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. Real pleasure. Real pleasure.